Welcome to the Crafter's Corner, the live stream that's all about taking a break from the dreadful horror that is our lives.
The cultists of Great Cthulhu often worship him through depraved and orgiastic voodoo rituals, performed as an indescribably grotesque mass of naked human abnormality, braying, bellowing, and writhing in the moonlight.
That's what we should do.
To make time for creativity and crafting. Whether you're a wargamer, game master, RPG player, model maker, cosplayer, costumer, or creative crafter of any kind, you're welcome here.
And I always confuse Monet and Manet. Now, which one married his mistress?
Monet.
Right, and then Manet had syphilis.
They also painted occasionally.
Maybe you have a few hundred, or maybe a few thousand unpainted miniatures laying around your house. Now would be a great time to pick them up, grab a paintbrush, and a few bottles of paint. Let's get those miniatures painted, whether you just need that one perfectly painted miniature for your D&D character, a band of orcs to pit against your PCs, a custom warband for Frostgrave or Mordheim, or even a whole new Warhammer army. Let's get to work on it. And you know what? Now would also be a great time for a glass of your favorite beverage to enjoy while we work.
Captain Kirk, I thought Romulan ale was illegal.
One of the advantages of being 1,000 light years from Federation headquarters.
Or maybe you need some terrain for your table. No problem. Now would be a great time for cutting foam, flocking bases, scratch building something cool, and just painting something awesome. Not only will we have a good time here, but it just might make your next game night that much better.
To do this, we are going to need a greenstone idol of Cthulhu.
Yes, Ben, you may speak.
I can make it. I majored in art for a semester.
That's great, Ben. No special skills are necessary here, as long as we're having fun. That's all that matters. Maybe you've got a model that you want to build. Maybe there's a model of the Starship Enterprise or of a Klingon warbird that's still sitting in its box. Well, now would be a great time to open it up and see what it would take to get it done. Have you poured your drink yet?
What's that? This, my friend, is a pint. It comes in pints?
Oh. I can get you one.
What about cosplay? Need some extra time to work on your next great costume? Now is the time to break out the sewing machine, the fabric, the thread, crafting foam, and maybe even some Warbla. That all sounds great to me. Let's see what we can create.
The human spider.
I don't care.
So grab your paints, brushes, thread, crafting foam, fabric, or whatever it might be that you need to create what you want to have for your next game session or your next convention, or maybe just what you need to have a little bit of fun tonight doing something creative. Come on in for a bit of fellowship and camaraderie, because now it's time for the Crafter's Corner. Let's make something great.
My transformation into a deep one has finally begun. Father Dagon be praised.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Crafter's Corner. Still trying to get everything set up here. And, oh, finally, I was missing my dry brush. Okay, so there we go, or what I've been using for my dry brush. How is everybody doing? Have you had a good day? I have done a lot of work, but one of my big rocks took, let's see, how many hours was that? 4.5 hours. I got it done, but that means I didn't move other big rocks, but that's all right. One of the big rocks, one of the things I got to do is I got to get miniatures painted up and for dinner at a board game. And I was working on the advanced HeroQuest miniatures last time, and so these are all being slap chopped. And I was working on that, but you know, I've got the reign of the witch, not the witch lord. This is the elf quest pack, and I've got the elf quest pack. I've got everything primed, but now all of that needs to be dry brushed for slap chopping. And you know what? Whoa. I'm probably going to need this before I need the advanced HeroQuest box. So I need to get started on those. So I'm a lot of dry brushing here. So what's everybody working on? Let me know what you're working on. Let's see. Oh, Mike is here. Welcome, Mike. Welcome, Mike. Good to see you. Good evening, Vision. Good evening. Hey, Mark. Finally get to join a live stream. Epic. Good to have you. Great to have you here. Bubba, good to see you. Normally, Sundays are my chill day. Well, that's why I thought that the Crafter's Corner would be a good thing to do on Sunday evenings, because generally I'd be chilling as well. I got to get, I was working on editing a intro for a show, which actually wasn't one of my shows. It was one that told somebody else that I would do for them as a Christmas present. And so I just got all of the footage in, and so I edited them a YouTube intro for their live stream. So that was the big rock I needed to get off. But now, got off my plate. Now I have got to work on my the intros for my new shows. Vision, day of rest for me. Got a ruck march to do tomorrow. I didn't get to march either, although I did take. I did walk for about 1.5 miles. I needed some soda for this evening, and so I walked down to the convenience store in order to close my watch rings. Oh, my watch rings are not yet closed, but to get closer to closing my watch rings, so I'm gonna have to do that before I get to bed. But yeah, so I got to get back to really marching though. Mike says, working on some terrain pieces for my upcoming HeroQuest night with the kids. Nice. I want to do a HeroQuest game very soon. Again, with the nephews, and also my aunt, who helped me build that 3D HeroQuest board that we did, has never gotten to play on it, and she needs to. So I'm looking forward to that. So, all right, that's what's going on. I have over here been going through the Table Talk. This is Table Talk episode 3 that we're going to be working with, and this is Jeff Engelstein who was with us. I interviewed him after we had been working on our dice probabilities and going through all of that on the channel. And so what I did was talk to him, because everybody was like, you need to talk to Jeff. You need to talk to Jeff. So I did, and we had a great discussion on dice probabilities for board games and role-playing games and all of that. And I thought it would be fantastic to kind of get a refresher on it before we get started again on Tuesday and designing games. I did hit my 750 word goal today on the World Primer. I'm getting much closer to the end of my World Primer. Well, for the dry brushing, I'm just going to be using this. This is just my basic gray paint for the gray dry brush. So I'm getting ready to use all of these speed paints, because I'm a slap shop. I'm using these speed paints. I've got speed paints, and I've got not contour paints, contrast paints from Games Workshop sitting over there. But I'm going to try to use the speed paints. But, oh, you know what? I have got to get the paints for the metallic speed paints. These just came out. And last time, or when I was painting some of the other ones, people told me on the stream about the metallic speed paint. And I went right over to Army Painter to try to do the try to get the metallic speed paint, but they were not for sale yet. So maybe this week I need to order the metallic speed paint, because it sure would be nice when it's time to speed paint all of these to be able to use the metallics, because I had to use a traditional painting technique with the metallics on the Barbarian Quest pack miniatures. But I'd really like to be able to do these all in speed paints if I can. I have not finished any slap chops. In fact, see, I just got to, last time we did a Crafter's Corner, I had just barely started putting some paint on these Skaven. Okay, let me see if you can see at all. But I do like it. I do like it, because you can see even with this face here and on the hands, I don't know if you can see, but I can see here. I'm going to take pictures of all this and do a video dedicated to them. I'll put pictures in the Ravenkeep Discord server as well. But just by putting that one color brown on it, I got tonal variations, and I think it looks pretty cool. So I'm very excited about this technique. The dry brushing takes a while, but not nearly as long as putting on a base coat and then waiting for everything, then putting on a base coat and then inking things and putting on the washes. Not nearly as long as that. So I'm still thinking it's going to be a good way to go, even though as far as calendar days goes, this is taking a while. But I got to get this done because I really want to be able to shoot dinner and a board game. And also, I want you to start reaching out to people about the tabletop, the RPG streaming show. I need to start reaching out to people about that. I need to put together an intro to that because I was thinking, what is it that's preventing me from shooting that show? First of all, I need to invite guest game masters. I need to cast the show, but that's one guest game master, and then I would only need 3 other people for the show to cast. And then I also need an intro for the show and some kind of theme song and a few other digital assets. And then we could be ready. So I'm going to work on that too, because it may be that I can get that ready to go before dinner and a board game. It'd be really nice. Once you get a show piloted, it's easier to keep going. So getting over the pilot is the big hurdle. So if I can pilot dinner and a board game solo edition with these miniatures and then pilot an RPG session, I think we'll be off and running again. Be able to do those shows a lot easier. Hey, not all who wander are lost. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And Stray's here. Welcome, Stray. Good to see you. Okay, let me go over here, and hopefully my audio is set up correctly. Let's oh, now wait a minute. Why don't I have that? Okay, now here we go. Okay, I'm hearing the show through my headphones now. You should also be hearing the show on your...
Fish are friends, not food.
I'm a little worried about Rob.
Yeah, we're painting.
Yes, it's
I'm going to skip
happening.
past this.
Ever since we
Sure to subscribe. Click watch
Thank you
now
for
to
letting me
start
know,
the
Vision.
first episode and join us
I think
for
I finally got
fun-filled
the technical
evenings
side of
of
the show.
dinner and a board game. All right, so Dragon Rush. And now it's time for Table Talk, where we'll be talking about the creative and business side of making things in the tabletop and fantasy genre. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming in for this third episode of Table Talk. This is a little bit earlier than we were last week, but that's all right. Tonight, we're going to be having Jeff Engelstein with us, and he is a tabletop game designer, and he is also heavily involved in the theory of game design. He's an academic like I used to be. He teaches game design at NYU, and you probably have already seen some of his material if you've been following the discussion that we've been having on games and the nature of randomness and using different methods or different types of randomness in, we were specifically talking about RPGs. And I think it's very special to have him here tonight because we were talking about his material and his presentation at the Game Designers Expo, and but we had some points of confusion. And so I said, you know what? I wonder if we can actually just have him on the show and talk to him. And he agreed. And so here he is. So let's bring him on. Jeff, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Did I get your last name, Engelstein or Engelstein?
Yeah, that was perfect. You were
okay,
dead on.
Okay. I need to check on that. So would you like to tell everybody who you are in the context, especially of game design and the fantasy genre, and you're heavily involved in the tabletop world, books, game design, all this kind of stuff?
Sure. I've been a game developer. My first game was published around 2011. I've got about, I should probably count one of these days, like 12, 13, 14 different games published at this point. Some of my more popular ones were the Space Cadet series. I did the Expanse board game based on the TV series. Most recently, I've got the Super Skill Pinball series, which is a series of roll and write games based on playing pinball on a board with a marker. Before even I did publish games, I did a lot of podcasting. I was on the Dice Tower for many years doing the game tech segment, and also hosted the Ludology podcast, which still continues. I stopped after 200 episodes. I stepped aside and turned the reins over to some terrific new hosts. But that show really gets into the nitty gritty of game design, specifically around board games, although we've had guests from a wide variety of different industries and different types of expertise. So yeah, and like you mentioned, books, I've done a couple of different books of building blocks of tabletop game design as like an encyclopedia of different mechanisms. And I did also a book about psychology of games, specifically around loss aversion, called Achievement Relocked, which is about how to use psychology to manipulate your players and to just be abusive to them. So that's a lot of fun. So I've been involved in a lot of different aspects of gaming for many different years.
All right, well, that's wonderful. So I was sent your presentation on white, brown, and pink noise by one of the people, Piotr Frank, who was commenting on the YouTube channel, because we've been having a discussion on the channel about randomness and basically its use within games. We were specifically talking about RPGs, kind of riffing off of Dungeons and Dragons, but a variety of different RPGs as well. And so he said, I really need, or this commenter said, I really need to watch this video, and I did, and I really enjoyed it. But we also confused ourselves some.
Okay, well then I've done my job.
Okay, so I really want to make sure I get this straight. So I'm going to bring up, as a former academic myself, I'm going to bring up and I'm going to take some notes. That way we've got we're clear on terminology. So I'm going to bring this up right here. Let me see if I can share this screen so we can type this. Okay, so right here. So you talked about two. Wait a minute, Vision. This is exactly the kind of productivity that I like. Vision says, I was a little productive today, though. Was able to clean one of my weapons today. All right, weapon cleaning. That sounds great. What type of weapon? Sword, axe, or firearm? Sounds like it might be the kind of firearm type weapon. But weapons do need cleaning. You talked about oh, there we go. All right, so I guess that's good enough for everybody to see. You talked about input and output randomness first, which I think is I think we got, and I think is very interesting to think about, because I hadn't thought about it in that way. Input randomness, something like you use Dominion as example, where you're going to get a hand of cards, that's going to be random, but then basically what you decide to do with those cards executes as you expect.
Right. Yeah.
But then output randomness is much more something like in Dungeons and Dragons, where you inherit a state of a game, you decide what to do with it, but the execution of that may not go as you.
I'm going to swing my axe, and then I'm going to roll a die and see if it's fantastic or if I fumble or what have you. Yes.
So Vision's everyday carry. See, we need to talk more about this. I'm thinking there's plenty of shows to do. But we need to talk more about this, I think, when we talk about like everyday adventurer and the afternoon adventurer. I think that the modern day adventurer could be something that we talk about, because I want to talk about EDC gear. And so Vision is EDCing a Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 spec. So I don't know a lot about that firearm specifically, but I know that one comes up a lot. The Smith & Wesson M&P, when people are talking about everyday carry and their EDC. I've been rotating among a variety, or not, well, a few different EDC pistols, but I haven't found the perfect one yet. So I suppose that's always the thing that that's the case with everybody. I do want to try out the SIG. The SIG P365. I went and I saw one of them, and I was holding on to it, and I was like, "Oh, chambered in 9mm, of course, 9mm." I want to check out. I was holding at the shop one of the SIG P365s, and that one seems like it might be awfully good. It might end up being a winner, but I don't have that one yet. Got my job back. I get my job back. I will probably pick up a 57. Anybody else have an EDC pistol? or we should probably add that to the Crafter's Corner. The Crafter's Corner would also be a good time to clean your EDC pistol. That could definitely be a part of this. Okay. So then we moved into the other type of... Hey, that's okay. That needs cleaning too. Axis, which we talked about, correlation, which has this time element to it, which I missed. Like when I watched the whole thing and then I went back and I went, oh, I didn't properly incorporate this time element.
Yeah.
So you're saying if you know, so we're talking about generating this number n here, and this is our random number in some way. And if you know that a random number is generated at time index t, or in this case x, in some time index, how much will you know about what random number is generated at time index +1?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yes. And yeah. Go ahead. Then I'll jump in and explain the confusion. Because I mean, I was kind of conflating, sir. There's this concept, but then there's also the concept of the probability distribution. And I did play kind of fast and loose with the two different aspects of it.
Okay. So I'm glad that came up, because that seems to have generated some of the confusion.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, this correlation element, and just for people that didn't see didn't see my video or the last video that you did talking about it, just to kind of go over again brown noise, white noise, and pink noise.
Okay. That's actually, so I got.
Oh, you've got that down. There you go.
Yeah. So
okay.
let's do that. Let's exactly
Sure.
let's define that. Let's do that, and I'll put notes here so everybody can see it too.
Okay. I like this. You're better than the students in my class, because they keep their laptops open and just play video games while I talk. So this is pretty good. They're actually writing this down. So white noise. The idea with white noise is that there is no correlation from one to the next. So something happens, and the next game state could be anything. And so a traditional die roll is pretty kind of corresponds to that. Just because I rolled a 20 last time doesn't mean I'm not going to roll. I have the same chance of rolling a 20, in spite of hot streaks and other things that people believe. If I roll 20 8 times in a row, I'm not more or less likely to roll a 20 on the ninth time.
Right.
So that's a white noise distribution where there's no correlation in the state. And I'll circle back and we'll give examples of some of these in a little bit. So then in brown noise, there's a very highly correlated. The state is there. There's maybe a little bit of variation, but it's in general, if it's in one state, you have a pretty good idea of where it's going to be in the next state. And then, so an example of that is, I think the example maybe I even used in the video is there's a game called Evo, which is about dinosaurs. And you're raising dinosaurs, and the key point about that game is that the environment of the island where the dinosaurs are is really critical. You can change your dinosaurs so they're better in the cold or they're better in the hot, and then as the game goes on, the environment will vary. But the way that it varies is there's a circular track that has basically goes from hot to cold and then back to hot again as it moves around. And every turn you roll a die, and on a 1, 2, I forget what it is, but it's like a 1, 2, or 3, it advances a box. A 4 or 5, it stays in the same box, and a 6, it goes back a box. May not be exactly that, but it's something like that. So in that case, if it's cold now, I know that it can't jump all the way to hot, super hot in the next step. And in general, it's going to get a little warmer if I'm at the coldest state, but it might not. It might stay there. But the range of results is very limited in terms of the way that the state is going to change. So that's an example of brown noise. It's more like kind of like a random walk kind of thing.
Range of results is limited based on current state.
Yeah.
Random walk.
Yeah. Like you keep flipping a coin and just moving left or right as you flip the coin. Then pink noise is sort of kind of in between those two. So most of the movements are going to be small, okay, but every once in a while there might be something really dramatic or be really big that happens. And the interesting part, scientifically, and just again kind of relating psychologically, is that there's a lot of stuff in the real world that is pink noise oriented, like the stock market, right? The stock market, most of the time you have a pretty good idea of where it's going to end up, but every once in a while it'll drop 20% in one day or whatever. You get these big swings periodically, but most of the time it operates. It'll still drift away from where it was, but it operates within the same band. Music is the same way. Music, if you look at music that's pleasing to the ear, the intervals between succeeding notes tend to exhibit a pink noise type spectrum, where there's mostly small movements. Most of the notes are relating to each other, but every once in a while there's a bigger jump. So the idea is, if you can emulate that in a game system, it's going to be much more. It could be more interesting to the players, but I think it's also can add to the emotional state in terms of increasing the drama and things like that. So that was the distinction. Now, probably I read through some of the comments before I came on here, but I think that probably some of the confusion was relating to the fact that, we talked, one of the examples, one of the ways that you can implement pink noise is through an exploding dice system.
Yes. Okay. So here we've got
down there
the examples that you put in that.
Yes.
In that of pink noise. Okay.
Right.
You want to talk about exploding dice first?
Yeah. Just because I'm a huge fan.
Let's see. Okay, so I didn't know this. I was just looking this up, Vision, because I am not a firearms expert. In fact, I am very, very much still new to it and learning. So this is something that was a NATO request as a replacement for the Parabellum cartridge. I didn't know that, so I looked that up. So learned something there. Did not know anything about that. In fact, I have got to get to the range. In fact, what I was thinking about doing with the afternoon adventure was going to the range. And what I'd really like to do, I found a range that's reasonably close to my house, but so I went over there and checked it out, but not close enough to march to. But what I'd love to be able to do is go over there, do a walk, and then go to the range and shoot, and then do a walk, and then I'd have to drive back. But the problem is, even that is taking more time than I have in the afternoon, because I would love, if I were just driving, I could probably just go over there. But if I do that, I wasn't going to hit my walk goals. So I got to get down in weight to where I want to be, and then I'll then probably spend some more time going to the range, because I desperately need range time. I need range time in a big way. I've got one of the pistols for potential EDC that hasn't had any rounds put through it. I just haven't been able to get to the range yet. I read the book It Dies the Fire, and I've kept a Creef messer taken care of. More for responsibility than coolness. Okay, I'm going to look that up. So what's the deal with the video here? Dice stats? Yeah, like odds, right? Yeah, probability and painting, it seems. Yeah. So the conversation, there's a series of videos on this channel that I did over the summer, which was specifically about, well, it all started when we were trying to evaluate the D20 in terms of, its usefulness, or if there was something else that we could do with the D20 to get a better probability distribution for our role-playing games, because I wanted, and I've talked about this on Tuesdays when we do our RPG design, that I want the significance of the player's skill or the character's skill to hold a lot more weight than it typically does in Dungeons and Dragons when you're rolling a D20, because you got this flat, very random distribution and very small numbers of comparatively small modifiers, right? So we went through all of that. Interestingly, we discovered, I thought that probably a bell curve distribution, a normal distribution was going to be what was going to help me out. But actually, as we went through all of that, this is a several video long analysis here on the channel, that actually didn't help as much as I thought that it would. And so I've actually used all of that to develop all of that information to develop the Faded Edge system that we're doing on Tuesdays. But Jeff here, I was sent this presentation that he did at, I don't know if it was some convention. It wasn't Gen Con, but it was some convention, but specifically on types of randomness and dice. And so that's why, and we had questions on it. So that's why this came up. So this whole conversation took place over the summer, just in video format. Lots of people in the chat and the comments of those videos brought up all kinds of great, or pointed out all kinds of great things as we were doing that. And so it was highly influential in my thinking with the development of the RPG that we're making on Tuesdays. And I also really enjoyed this conversation about randomness and dice. So KConv1 says, I suspect Torg and Shadowrun would be good examples of peak noise since they have exploding dice. We need to look at Shadowrun on the morning grind. Excuse me. We need to look at Shadowrun on the morning grind. Shadowrun and Traveler are two that I don't know anything about, but I need to. So also, like in Torg, if you roll a 10 or a 20, you roll another d20 and add it, and you keep adding if you keep rolling 10 or 20. I didn't know that, but actually Jeff brings up later that you don't have to explode on the highest number. So I guess this is an example of it, that you can explode on a 10 then, which I hadn't thought of specifically as I was thinking about different ways to design a game. I had always thought, well, if you're exploding, then you're exploding on the top number. But of course, that doesn't have to be that way. It's frequently that way, but doesn't have to be that way. And so some of the concerns that people have about exploding dice could be mitigated if you explode on multiple numbers or on numbers that aren't necessarily the top number. Yeah, so it's a rifle round that pistols can fire with less recoil and about twice the velocity. I'm going to have to check into that. A lot of manufacturers are putting out 5.7 pistols. I don't have... Smith & Wesson was not on my list of manufacturers, but maybe I should look at them again. Twice the velocity of a 9mm? All right, let's get...
Of exploding dice. So exploding dice, just a typical system is like I would roll and, let's say on a 5, let's say on a 1, 2, or 3, I miss. On a 4 or 5, I get 1 hit, and a 6, I get 2 hits, and it explodes. That's what it's called. So what an explosion is you basically roll the die again, and if you get more hits, those just add to your original total. But if you roll another 6, then you roll again. So theoretically, there is no upper bound on what can happen. And games that use that can be very dramatic, because if you use them, there was a naval game that used them, used this exploding dice system, and no matter how far out of it you were, no matter how small the attack was, there was always a chance that it could explode the largest battleship, because you just keep getting explode results, and you just keep getting more and more hits, and they pile up. So again, the interesting part about that, whereas like if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, even with a critical hit, there's an upper bound on what can happen. With a lot of these pink noise systems, there's no necessarily upper bound on what it is. Now the thing is, yeah, right. Yeah. So that's the basic concept. So, I mean, I guess you can jump in and, talk about maybe some of the confusion or some of the questions that people kind of had around these concepts before I make assumptions.
Well, okay. Well, I can talk directly about what my assumptions were, because as I was watching it, I passed by the time element, and then I got into the white, brown, and pink noise. And I was like, okay, I think I've got this. So let me ask you about the exploding dice here. I understand we got a low probability of a high probability of something kind of small result, a low probability of an enormous result, but it could happen. Yeah. But if I roll an exploding die on this turn, time index 1, that doesn't tell me anything about my exploding dice at time index 2 next turn.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
So how does that relate?
It really doesn't relate to the correlation. I mean, the reason that I introduced the concept of the correlation and the fact that things are kind of moving slowly is that really relates to that you really need that to explain brown noise, right? Brown noise is what really kind of relies on this idea that you are really hovering around a central result. So, and then when you get into, the white noise and the pink noise, those can be to an extent, you can treat them either as a correlation, or you can just treat them as sort of a probability distribution in terms of where you move to. So It depends on, in some cases there's a game state where it's It is correlated. Like if I'm moving on a board, then and I use a pink noise technique to figure out how many spaces forward I get. Then there's the space that I'm going to be at is kind of there's a correlation from, going from space to space to space. But the actual, it's basically the correlation is basically if I'm at a point, say on a map, then you're talking about the ability to predict where the other points I might end up at t+1. Okay, so a brown noise, they're all going to be basically, it's going to be a very tightly centered around that center point. With a white noise, it's I could jump to pretty much anywhere on the board. And with a pink noise,
unpredictably,
pink noise, you're kind of rubber banding around, but you could go farther away. So it's not a 100% clean analogy. It's more of a way of thinking about your probability distributions, thinking about the way the game states are, but it's a little fuzzy in the definition. As I said, I was playing a little bit fast and loose between the idea of a correlation and the idea of a probability distribution.
Well, let's maybe we can start to or do a little bit to advance that in this idea of delta dice. So let's use this idea to separate. I was going to say that one of the things I want to do, I've been holding out for until I lose weight. I got to buy more clothes because my clothes are just I had to get some for Christmas because I had nothing to wear because I've been changing weight and then also, been sitting at home. And so you just end up not having clothes. So I don't want to rebuy clothes until I get to my goal weight. But one thing that I really also want to buy when I get to the goal weight, which I'm not exactly sure what is, but now it's 170, maybe 165, we're going to see, is that I want to get a battle belt. And I just don't want to buy one of those until I'm at the ideal weight. And I think that'd be a good reward to myself because I want to be able to put together, I've got the backpacks, I've been working on those, but I also want to put together a scout belt, what I'm calling a scout belt, which is like modern day adventurer kind of scout belt. But and then also I like the idea that they've got the Velcro on it, so I can outfit different gear and then just keep the interior belt on and wear that around. But then when I'm going for a particular type of mission, right, for the modern day adventurer, then put on the exterior belt that has the particular gear loadout for that. So I don't know, maybe 165 pounds, maybe 170. I'm just going to have to see how I go. Maybe 170. Some 170 is the next target, then 165. The reward's going to be a battle belt, and that's going to be fun. So we'll have to do videos on that. Eventually, we're going to have to do videos on this kind of stuff. So Stray says that Easy D6 has exploding dice. It did, didn't it? It did, didn't it? And we liked Easy D6. KConv1 says, and in Torg, you have the cards that you re-roll or roll again. I've seen in 200 plus range just from rolling D20s. I don't know anything about that one. There are so many to look at. If KConv1, we talk about different RPGs, or that's been our topic for the past 3.5 months on the morning grind every morning at 9:30. So may have to look at that one as well. W3 Techie. Hey, W3 Techie. Good to see you. If you think of a +5 as a 1 in 4 chance, you have a 3 in 4 chance of failure. You have a 3 in 4 chance of failure to score a 20. So for Magic Sword +5 and +2 ability bonus and +3 weapon proficiency +10, now it's a 1 in 2 chance, 50%. Yeah. Okay, I see where you're going with that. Yeah. And we broke down a lot of things, like math like that in the videos over the summer. They're still on the channel. W3 Techie says, that's why I like 1E and OSR and 5E. The modifiers keep small. Oh, so you like the small modifiers. You like the small modifiers. I've gone the other way. I've gone the other way. Hey, BGD. Good to see you. Yeah, me lose weight. I mean, so I'm at 176 right now. When I started live streaming, I was at 195 or 196. Can you imagine that? The extra 20 pounds? Like, what was I carrying around? But so yeah, I've been as low as 155, I think, in adult life, but that was too low. I looked emaciated. I just wanted to know how low I could get, like just losing weight. But I looked kind of emaciated and wraith-like. That's too low. So, but 160, it might be 165. It might be 165. I'm still carrying some weight here at the gut. So 170, I'm evaluate, then evaluate 165. We'll see. I am 6 feet tall. Like right at 6 feet tall. BGD says, exploding dice aren't generally a problem because despite the fact that an explosion occurs 8% of the time on a D12 to 25% of the time on a D4, the time the player enjoys of the time and a player enjoys the excitement of this roll with the chance of more, statistically speaking, exploding dice are a weak mechanic. It depends on how often you roll them and stuff like that. We were actually talking about, we were talking about something different with crits today. Oh, I've still got to get some dice for Dungeon Crawl Classics. I've been thinking about Dungeon Crawl Classics quite a bit. I've kind of liked what it was doing. It makes me want to write some more stuff. Everything is writing. Everything that I really want to do, man, it is writing. BGD says, a D4's average output rises from 2.5 to 3.3. A D6 from now I love the dice math here. All right. So the D4's average output rises from 2.5 to 3.3, 33%. A D6 from 3.5 to 4.2. D8 from 4.5 to 5.1. D10 from 5.5 to 6%, 11%, and D12 from 6.5 to 7. This is equivalent to an average explosion bonus of between 0.5 and 0.8. Get yourself a lensatic compass and learn some land navigation. That will take you all places. I am very sorry to admit that my land navigation, I need to really brush up on that. That needs to become more of a part of the afternoon adventure and stuff like that we do here. Because, I mean, my degrees are in geography. And I used to know a lot more of that. But if you gave me just general orienteering compasses, man, I would have to really brush up on what I was doing. I used to even teach that. But I have got to brush up. So that's something that's got to happen. I need a good compass. I don't have one as part of my gear. But hey, modern day adventuring gear, you've got to have a good compass for navigation. But man, I'm really going to have to brush up on that in a big way. And I'm embarrassed by that. DCC love. Everybody loves that. Kamenya. I'm going to have to look that up. I don't know that word. I'm going to look that up. Daniel says, what if you made the explosion proc on the lowest value and made rolling 1 less of a lowdown? You could definitely do that. We got agreement on the compass here from BGD. You could definitely do that. Now, I hadn't thought about that quite as much. In fact, I was just talking about that as far as a few minutes ago, that Jeff brings up the fact that, well, hey, if you're upset with some parts of exploding dice, you can explode more. Maybe that would help out BGD's situation too. Maybe you explode on both the high end and the low end. Or Torg was talking about exploding also in a mid range or something like that. So, yeah, it wasn't something that immediately came into my mind because I just think of exploding, high value. But I think there's potentially a lot more things you could do with it if you break the over-reliance or just break the mental attachment to always exploding on the tall one. Mike says you should always have a compass. Phones die at the worst time. And yes, want to further look into DCC. Just gave a lensatic compass as a birthday gift. See, that's another thing. The afternoon adventure, modern day adventure, yeah, needs to happen. But other shows first. Right? The idea of the game state from the mechanic that's going to change the game state. So this Delta dice mechanic that you talked about was saying, okay, let's say that we have a game state of 8. So, the game state's a integer here.
Yeah.
And then every turn, you're going to change the game state by rolling 2 6-sided dice. And one of them's positive, one of them's the negative. And then the difference between the two is going to change the game state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the rolling of those 2d6 is obviously not correlated between this turn and next turn, because what I roll with my 2d6 is not correct. But that mechanic has the result of introducing pink noise into the change of game state.
Yeah, exactly. So your game state would be 8, and then, you know, if I'm just going to flip a coin and go like just plus or minus 1, I know there's limited what I can be. But yeah, in this case with the kind of a dice difference, which is what was used in the remake of Crude, used that system. In that case, then the overall game state is going to be increasing unpredictably. Now, in that case with the Delta dice, there's a maximum that you can go. The most you can go is 5. Because if you roll a 1 and a 6, the most you can go is 5. So, you know, it's not true pink noise like exploding dice, which has an infinite tail. But it still gets the point across that, you know, you can plan around it being a 0 or a 1. It's probably what it's going to be. Probably it might be higher. You never know where you're going to be.
We can distinguish my keyboard is thumbed up or something.
I admire your ability to be typing and spelling in real time. That's very impressive. That's bold.
That's something I like to do. We can distinguish between the mechanic that generates noise, or that generates, or the mechanic that changes the game state.
Yeah.
From the change of game state itself.
Right. And just to clarify that, so compare with like Crude, which uses this idea of this game state and it goes up by a number. When the number reaches something, then the economy will go from like to the next level. It'll go from recession to recovery or whatever, right? But there are games like, I forget the name of it. There's a game about making chocolates. I may have even talked about it in the video.
I think you did. You're talking about, that was your early example of
right, and that one as a white noise, right? So that one, the economic situation is you just literally draw a card from a deck of economic situations. So it has absolutely nothing to do with what it was. You know, if it was in depression, it could still, you know, it could be anything the next time. You can't predict anything about what it's going to be on the next turn in that kind of a situation, which I think is much less satisfying for players and cuts back on their ability to be able to plan in any meaningful way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and there's different ways to do it. And again, there was a game called Tyranno X, which was also about dinosaurs. I don't know why I've got dinosaurs on the brain tonight, but that also had another environmental system, but that had like this cascading environmental chip thing. So people would like put chips into different regions, and then you flip them all up, and then if there was the ones that had the most would like kick out the other ones. But there was a clever system that it could cascade and it could have very unpredictable results. So most of the time, again, in that you had kind of small changes in the environment, but every once in a while you could get very big changes in the environment. So it doesn't have to be dice based, right? There's other mechanisms that you can use to generate this kind of feel of, you know, yeah, probably know what it's going to be next turn, but not 100% sure.
What terms then could we use then? Because if we're going to use white, pink, and brown to talk about states through time,
yeah,
what would we talk about with that dice roll? Like the probability, the probabilistic dice rolls?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably that would be the probability distribution would be, you know, I mean, that's what comes out of a die is a distribution. So like for an exploding die gives you it's almost like an exponential decay kind of a curve as it comes out. Whereas just a regular, like if you're just rolling a D20, then it's just flat. If you're rolling 2 dice or 3 dice, then you get.
I was just looking at, so yes, that's the kind of compass I need to get. Absolutely. I was just looking at, I put it in my Amazon cart. So there we go. That's exactly what I need to get. See, I would give it to my nephews. I've been trying to get my nephews into stuff for a while. But, you know, and when they're over, I did a video on the channel about doing the board game weekends where I have one of my nephews over and we basically just play board games. He stays over at my house at one night, so it's not a whole weekend. But like Friday night or something like that, we play whatever we want to play Friday nights and also they're all throughout Saturday. But even though we do play a lot of tabletop games, I also try to do something educational. Like one time we did water purification, and then one time we did different methods to start fires. I did a video on planning a board game weekend with kids and also trying to do educational stuff like that. Because I think that's important. So he came over. So I've been trying to teach stuff like that. I don't know if they would appreciate the compass right now. They need one, but trying to get them to do it would be like, actually, this right here, this is part of my EDC. We'll go into this later. But like, I love the Altoids 10 stuff. I found people who are doing the EDC Altoids 10s on YouTube, and I was like, oh my God, I loved little stuff as a kid. I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. I need to do one of those. Like, what can you put into an Altoids 10, to have with you? So part of my EDC is the Altoids 10 right here. I've got it on my belt, in a pouch on the belt. But I thought I did that really because of the nephews. I was like, you know what? This just looks like fun. I'm going to do that. But also, who will really love this is the nephews. I'll get them into this kind of stuff, and we'll talk about kinds of stuff that you could put in your Altoids 10. But I couldn't really get them into it. They weren't really into it. So he goes, yeah, I can see. Vision says, but he said, I got my phone, but what are you going to do if your phone dies? Daniel asks, can someone please explain what dry brushing does? I've never painted miniatures before. Well, this is admittedly a weird way to dry brush things, because this technique, I'm still experimenting with this technique. Ordinarily, when you dry brush, or the idea behind dry brushing, and I'm doing very fast here. This is supposed to be very fast. This is very loose. I'm trying to get these miniatures to tabletop standard. I'm not trying to do expert painting on any of these things. But when you dry brush something, the idea is that you put just a little bit of paint on the brush and then wipe most of it off, and then just go over the miniature. These, do I have another one? Let's see, what have I got here? Well, just go over the miniature so that you're just hitting the top parts of the miniature, and you're not actually going down into the cracks and crevices of the miniature. So like with this bookshelf right here, dry brushing it, and like I said, this is a heavy, sloppy kind of dry brush, but I'm just going over it, so I'm not getting down into the black. So I'm leaving recesses and I'm leaving shadows in here. The reason that I'm dry brushing all these miniatures with a medium gray is because I'm experimenting with something called the slap chop technique. Because ordinarily, if you're dry brushing something, you're dry brushing like a lot of people dry brush mail armor, because that's got a good texture on it. So if you've got a dark color for the mail and then you dry brush over it and you just hit the tops of all the rings, you can get a really nice effect. So that's generally how dry brushing is used. But there's this method that people talk about on YouTube now called the slap chop method, where you prime your miniatures in black, which is what I've got here. And then you take a medium gray and you dry brush, sort of do a heavy dry brushing of medium gray all over all of the high points of the miniatures. Then you're going to dry brush in white, a much more careful dry brush in white, like I've got on the Skaven right here. So this Skaven's got black, and then he's got a pretty heavy dry brush in medium gray, and then a much lighter dry brush in white that kind of just picks up the edges. And then what I'm supposed to do, according to this technique, and I'm just experimenting with it, is then take one of these speed paints, either the speed paints or the contrast paints, and then just in one, so this should allow me to paint them in just one go, rather than having to do highlights and then a shade and then redo the base color and then do a highlight and all of that, because I'm putting in, theoretically, the midtones and the highlights with these dry brushes. And then if you use these speed paints, which are translucent paints, or the contrast paints, so you're supposed to be able to get a really good tabletop level effect with a lot less effort than traditional painting techniques. So that's what we're doing here. Yeah. It's not exactly, what I'm doing here is not exactly the Zenithal primer variant, but it's close. I tried Zenithal priming and use of the speed paints on the Barbarian Quest Pack miniatures. It didn't work all that well, but I don't think that had anything to do with the Zenithal part. It didn't work well because I was still learning how to use the speed paints, and that kind of made them ugly. And then also, I made some horrific color choices, like some horrific color choices. So they're fine. I mean, they came out fine. They're perfectly acceptable tabletop standard stuff, I suppose, but they're a little bit below where they are a pretty serious step, a large step below what I would want as tabletop quality miniatures. But that's because of the learning curve of the speed paints and also my color choices. I think so. What I tried to do with them was, I can't remember now. I think I primed them in gray, but then used a white zenithal primer on top of it because I thought basically that would be it. If I use the gray and then the white zenithal on them and then speed paint, that should come up with something really good. But it actually seems like this slap chop technique is going to do what I thought I was going to be able to do with the zenithal priming. I'm doing a very heavy, sloppy, intentionally fast dry brush. Yeah. Vision says, you said you don't have any military experience. Do you have military family members? Well, yes. I had a grandfather who was in World War II and talked quite a bit about that. He was the one who said that if you don't join the military, you're going to miss out on a completely different side of life. He was in the Air Force, technically the Army, of course, but the U.S. Army Air Forces. He always said that he was in the Air Force. I had my other grandfather was also in the Air Force, but he was younger, so he was not in World War II. He always says the Bay of Pigs was the closest he got to combat. BGD says you can put some super cool emergency supplies in an Altoids tin. I think so. I mean, I just think it's a fun exercise. I think it's a fun episode, a fun thing to try out. I did try. I tried to get over into some kind of deployment, even as a civilian, but I only kind of quasi did that. I did get over to Afghanistan. That's a story for some time. I did eventually get to Afghanistan, but I was really trying to go places. But it seemed like in order to be deployed as a civilian, you had to have prior military service. But I tried. I did get to Kabul for a limited amount of time. Pan Smith says, okay, I missed it. What's the episode playing in the corner? This is Table Talk episode 3, where I interviewed Jeff Engelstein, who is a game designer and he also teaches game design. And he was also on the it's in the Dice Tower. He was on the Dice Tower podcast. And so we are talking about dice and probability distributions for games. Yep, it's Slapchop. I'm trying it out. I haven't finished a single miniature in Slapchop yet, but I think this is what we're trying up here. Yeah, trying to pick up the highlights here. Stray says Slapchop worked out awesome for me. It seems like, from what I've been seeing, that it's the winning technique for the speed paints. It seems that way. I'm going to confirm that when I try this, and I'll do a whole video review on it. But it seems like that's the winner. I was trying to make it happen with Zenithal, like I was saying, but it didn't quite. So it seems like this is the better technique. BGD says Slapchop works. You're maximizing the contrast of your undertones in order to augment the automatic tinting and shading effects of the contrast paint light over it. Yeah. So if I wasn't slap chopping, what I would be doing as my standard painting technique would be taking these guys. I probably would not have primed in black. I probably would have primed in gray, and then painted everything a solid base color to block in all the colors. Then I would have taken some type of shade wash, and washed the entire miniature to get my shadows in there. And then I would have to let that dry. So that requires painting the entire miniature one time to get the base color, then very carefully putting on the shade. Now, if you're doing it all in one color shade, you can be a little bit faster, but still you have to wait for like the fronts to dry, then turn them all over and then do the other side and wait for that to dry. Sometimes you have to do the sides depending on the miniature. So that takes time. And then you have to paint the miniature again with the base coat again. And then if you want to go on to another highlight level, that's another level of painting. So I think this is faster because this is effectively both. Well, see, yeah, this dry brush is effectively the base color, and I can dry brush this sort of heavy dry brush a lot faster than I can put the base color on for sure. Hey, Wolverine. Good to see you. We're painting and talking dice. Grandpappy was a Navy comms guy, Stray says. Oh, W3 Techie was in the Army. And Grandpa in the Navy. Both grandpas in the Navy. Seems like, so I think the Air Force was already established as a branch of service before the time my, actually an official branch of service before my other grandfather joined. Lots of people in Mike's family, granddad Army, dad Navy, and I was a jarhead. Oh, Mike was a Marine. How about that? Going home was always a free-for-all. Keith says, I used something similar to Slapchop on my Necromunda gang. I posted on your Discord a while back. Oh, yeah. Okay. I don't remember those. Oh, no, I do. Because we were talking about Necromunda. I was like, oh, yeah, I remember Necromunda. I got to play like 1 or 2 games of Necromunda. That was a popular game at one of the local gaming stores I went to. Wolverine's working on it. Well, welcome. Welcome. We're doing that a lot around here. We do that on Tuesdays, but also I thought this particular table talk would be very relevant to game design. All right, let's keep going.
A Gaussian distribution. So those are the different types of distributions that you can have. So pink noise would be, or a pink distribution would sort of be an exponential distribution. And white noise would typically be a flat, just a strictly flat distribution. And I would say, although it's not, I mean, different ways of defining it, but I mean, brown noise doesn't really have as much of a correlate in terms of a probability distribution. If anything, maybe it would be like a more of a Gaussian distribution or something like that, where there's a peak, and everything's going to pretty much be around that peak, but it might spread out a little bit. But even that's sort of a form of pink noise in a way. It's almost like reflected exponential decaying curves on either side.
I was using the bell curve, but
yeah, bell curve is good.
But well, okay, so that's interesting. So because I had been thinking, well, that maybe in that case, because we've done some videos on potentially using 2D10 or 3D6 instead of a D20 in Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. And the first time I went through your video, I was like, well, when you're doing like 3D6, like in GURPS or something like that, you have a small probability of an extreme result, and you have a higher probability of a much more narrow result.
Yes.
And I was thinking, oh, so pink, that would be pink. That was my first thought.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think bell curves to a certain extent are pink noise because there's a normal result that there's more, and then it tails off on the other side. So that's why I'm saying like brown noise doesn't really have, because brown noise more specifically is relating to the state rather than to the probability distribution of the way that things move. Yeah, but I mean, it's one of the, and this is getting more into the topic of randomness in general. I mean, one of the fun things about randomness is, the more dice that you throw, the less random your game actually is. There has been war games where you have to roll like 10 or 20 dice when you're doing an attack. You get all these units and people are like, oh, this is so exciting. I get all these dice, and you throw them out. But the reality is that if I'm throwing 10 or 20 dice, it's way, way, way more predictable than if I'm just throwing 1 die or 2 dice. So the more dice you put into your system, you're basically taking luck out of it, and you're moving it much closer to the mean result.
Okay. Yes. And we've talked about that as well. And I think that's an important point of clarification, because people have been kind of back and forth on that as well. Because if you just say something direct, like the more dice you add, the more you remove randomness, that may not be true, because it is important to note how you add those dice. And what I'm saying here is, for an example, let's say that you're on a roll of a 1 of a D20, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
And you got to walk across this tightrope, and so the game master gives you the roll of a 20 to walk across it. Otherwise, you fall off. Okay, well, that's a 5% chance you're going to fall off. It doesn't help you to say, oh, well, then that seems rather random. Here, you need to make 20 rolls of that die in order to successfully cross that, because you've just increased the probability that you're going to roll a 1 on any of those 20 rolls.
Well, but that's not...
actually, at a certain chance, in a certain respect, you have actually decreased randomness, because you've actually increased the certainty that you're going to roll a 1 someplace and fall off.
Yeah, you've made it pretty sure that you are probably going to fail. Yeah.
So it's games like Warhammer, where you're rolling these fistfuls of dice.
Right.
Because I want to be clear that, like, if you're in a war game where you've got these fistful of dice games and you're going to do an infantry charge on this fixed position, and you know your type of infantry and what they're armed with, and then you've got to go uphill and they're dug in and you've got to know their equipment, and you're going to roll a whole bunch of dice to resolve that attack. We can start to predict the result of that attack.
Yes.
But it doesn't follow. That's not the same thing as saying we just set up a very complicated, we're about to play a very complicated war game for the Battle of Borodino, and we're all set up. And we're going to roll thousands of dice, before this is over. That allows us to predict what's going to happen here at the Battle of Borodino.
Right. Well, plus not every die roll. I mean, in that case, yeah, it gets interesting too, because you not every die roll has the same complexity. It has the same importance, right? Maybe certain attacks are important or whatever. So, I mean, a very famous example of that is there was, so the game Advanced Third Reich, which was a simulation of World War II in Europe, unsurprisingly. That's a really complex war game from the 70s and 80s from Avalon Hill. If you wanted to attack London, as the Germans, if you wanted to invade and London, most of the time you had to do a 1-to-1 attack on London. And it came down to, I forget or maybe a 2-to-1, whatever the precise numbers were. Basically, if you rolled like a 6, you lost the battle. And so, there was a lot of, a ton of die rolls in that game, but if that was the strategy that you chose, the entire fate of the game came down basically that one die roll. If the attack completely failed, then that was it. It was game over. So here was one incredibly important die roll that was just a D6 that was just that was just dropped. So even though there's 200, 300 die rolls across the whole game, most of them are a very comparatively much lower significance, whereas this is like you've invested all of your resources into this one single battle, which can be exciting, but it can also be unsatisfying in a game that's that long. When you're playing a 4 or 5 hour game, to have it just come down to that one thing can be dissatisfying.
And I was thinking about that. I think I wrote about that or talked about that in the context of a Dungeons and Dragons character, because it's like, you can say, well, over the whole course of your career as your character, you're going to roll tons of D20s. Mm-hmm. And you can say that, okay, so that means you've got an average of 10.5. But when you're trying to cross the tightrope, it's still a 5% chance. It doesn't matter that, that all, the average of all 400 rolls before that was 10.5.
Yes. Yeah. So context is important, but in general, in one action, if you're making your players roll a lot of dice to resolve one thing, it's going to be much more predictable. That
increases your predictability.
And that's that's why casinos make money, and one person sitting down at a craps table may or may not make money, but overall they will make money at the craps table.
And and my father actually runs a craps YouTube channel. He's big into craps. It's funny that we're talking about dice here, and it must be a family thing or something like that.
Yes. My father took me aside.
It was my father's YouTube channel that I was making that intro for. I was making his live intro for his craps channel actually today. Hayes Hayes says, my grandfather was an army barber in World War II and a bomber pilot in the Korean War. Interesting. Trick Rhine, welcome. Good to see you, Trick. How did you look into Iron Sworn Starforged dice? Both of the target number and the dice roll are randomized. 2d6 plus modifier plus 1d10 as target modifier to beat. No, I have not. But, I noticed that Iron Sworn was on the list of things that we needed to evaluate, and I don't know anything about it. Now, we have talked about that idea of, in fact, something about just came up about rolling for the target number. That might have just been in a comment that I was reading earlier today, where somebody was saying, I think it was, that somebody was saying that was their solution for the game master not being able to consistently and accurately judge the difficulty of something, that they actually rolled for the difficulty at their table while playing D&D consistently. Now something like Cortex does that as well. You're in Cortex, you're rolling for the difficulty as well each time. So this is something on Ironsworn as well. 2d6 plus modifiers versus a d10 as the target number to beat. That isn't something that I have looked at. Well, I haven't looked at those specifically, but that type of system I haven't looked at a lot, because it increases the number of dice they have to roll. Like, it doubles the number of dice to resolve every action. Oh, okay. Vision. Let me see. My mother, my father, my brother's father, my sister's father, my uncle, my aunt, my grandfather, my cousin, all various branches. I just carried on the tradition. Yeah, so a huge military family over with Vision. Keith says, my son just started working on his game design advancement for Cub Scouts earlier today. The kids decided on a World War II game where you have to find a spy. They want it to have a feel like Clue. Oh, that's fun. That combines so many things. Cub Scouts, game design, World War II, history. Cool. KConv1 says, Champions uses a system like this. You roll 10 to 15 d6 and then add them up for stun damage. And you also count the ones as zeros, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 as 1, and then 6 as 2 for killing damage. The game found link? You mean to Ritual? I can do that. See, that's one of the things I've still got to be thinking about. Let's see. Where is the Ritual? You're talking about the game found link to Ritual? Ritual board game on Game Found. In the chat now. Pan says, so you've settled on a dice system, or are you creating a new conflict resolution mechanic for your game for Heath and Wolverine? I have created a new system, and it still has got to be play tested and worked with. But I've created a system based on all the conversations that we had on this subject over the summer. And so I put all of that together, all the videos and stuff like that on the channel about dice that I posted this summer, and then this all the feedback that I got in comments, and then also this conversation with Jeff, and then used all of that information to come up with an action resolution mechanic for Fated Edge. So I'm in the process of writing it up. Let's go back over here to...
When I was a teenager, he's like, Jeff, he got very serious. He's like, I'm going to impart to you my secret about playing craps. He said, I was like, oh, okay, great, Dad. What's the secret? He's like, he says, you bet small, and then when the shooter gets hot, get all your money on the table then. And I was like, well, I don't, there's no such thing as a shooter getting hot. He was very disappointed. So that was, we patched things up after that. But yeah, I mean, that's, like you talk about correlation, stuff like that. A lot of people believe in hot shooters and things that's going to make a difference. I mean, if you go to casinos, how much money do they have invested in these incredibly fancy roulette wheel displays that show now like all of the different numbers that have been spun for the last 3 hours and the distributions. And I see people walking through and looking at these signs like they're some kind of, they can glean some sort of meaning out of them when they're just, it just gives the illusion of control.
Well, let's take this comment. I had my screen on something else, but we have a comment about exploding dice, and you said you were
sure
for exploding dice. So let's take this, because I was thinking about using an exploding dice mechanic when we're talking about weapon damage as well, like a role-playing game. And so the Blue Shadow says, I don't like exploding dice because it messes with the math and can make things with smaller dice better than things with large dice, which completely break the weapon balance. Do you have any input on that?
Well, I mean, it doesn't mess with it messes with maybe your perception of what the math should be. But, I mean, it depends on, what you're looking for out of your game. I mean, and this goes to player psychology, right? Some people want to be super, they want to be analytical. They want to, they want their plans to come to fruition. They get very frustrated if they like plan the perfect move and then they're thwarted by a very, a small probability event, like a black swan kind of event. Sometimes, depending on the players and the game, that having that chance that, a David can beat a Goliath can be very exciting. Actually, in a new game that is just coming out hopefully. It's that I designed, co-designed with Jack Thompson, called Chang'e, which is about the voyages of the Chinese treasure fleet in the 1400s in the Indian Ocean. So in that game, you take actions as the captain of the fleet, as the admiral of the fleet, and it's a solo only, it's a solitaire game. But we didn't want it. Originally, we had like challenge numbers, and then you basically can roll a die to see whether or not you succeed in the action. And we were concerned because we really didn't want to have always be perfect plans always be possible. So, but we didn't want to have a wide variation necessarily in the results. So what we do is we actually have a special die that's in it that has 3 zeros, a +1 with a star, and a +2 with a star. And the +1 with a star and +2 with a star are exploding. And those add to the difficulty of the challenge. So once you decide how many resources, like if your target number is a 5, you play cards equal to 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or however much you want to do, and commit to it, and then you roll the die or multiple dice sometimes to see how much you add to the challenge. So most of the time it's going to be really close to the challenge level because 3 sides are 0, 1 side's just only +1, but occasionally it can explode. But we very specifically wanted, because of the theme of sort of nautical exploration, and you don't know what's going on, you're sailing into unknown waters, that there's never anything really such as a perfect plan. But as a player, you've got to it's about judging the risk. Is what do I do? Do I put extra in, or do I just throw in 1 extra, 2 extra, 3 extra? How much of a buffer do I want to give myself? How much of a problem is it going to be? Whereas, I mean, the original design that we did, it was either just 0, 1, or 2. That was it. So if you put in 2 above the challenge, you knew you were always going to be guaranteed to be successful. And we found that it really just drained a lot of the life out of the system, because, that uncertainty we felt was really important to have it become less of a mechanical exercise and feel more like an adventure. So that was the way that we used the exploding dice to kind of do that. Now, the dice are only used on about 1/3 of the challenges. Most of the challenges are fixed numbers, but about 1/3 of them force you to roll this die. So we kind of sprinkle it in and spice it up. Or you can try to do extra things but then you're taking on a die yourself. If you try to do a double action turn, you can roll a die to do that and things like that. But in general, we found that from a player psychology standpoint, that was working, and that it brought the experience and the feel that we wanted. There may be other experiences and other types of effects that you're trying to get where it's not appropriate, where you want the players to know, okay, I've committed these resources, so I know that I'm going to succeed. Robinson Crusoe, if you're familiar with that game, a cooperative game, you have 2 actions a turn, and you can do 2 different actions, or you can spend both of your actions on one activity. If you spend both on one activity, you're guaranteed success. If you split up your stuff, then each one there's a chance of failure. You have to roll dice then to see whether or not they succeed. So in that case, they wanted, Ignacy wanted to specifically give the players a certain path, but you can't do it every time because if you only do 1 action a turn, you don't have enough time to accomplish the goal. So we kind of built in the fact that you're going to have to take risks, but you can have a little more control over the risks that you're taking.
With what Blue Shadow is here thinking about, like when I was thinking about, well, what if I used exploding dice for weapon damage?
Yeah.
And you've got a dagger that does D4, okay, and it explode on a 4, and then you've got a great axe that rolls a D12. The dagger is more likely to explode than the great axe if you're rolling the top number. So I had thought that, oh well, okay, if I'm going to do that, then I can't have D4 to D12 ranges with these dice. Like I need to make more use of the smaller dice in combination. Have a D6 and a D4 for one particular weapon, to try to make all of those things more attractive to the players.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you really wanted to go all the way from D4 to D12 or D20, I mean, you could have a D4 explode on a 4, and you could have a D12 explode on a 10, 11, or 12. and then you
Well,
get
that's
this new
true. That's
kind of
another way to
feeling,
do it.
too.
They don't all have to explode on the same number. Then you
Right.
have to remember that. But that's a good point. That you could adjust that by what numbers they explode on. Well, that's an interesting.
You can also explode on the lower numbers. Explode on the 1, 2, or 3. That can be interesting too. It doesn't have to be the highest number. You could explode on the lowest numbers. I mean, there's a lot of different interesting things that you can play with if you're just doing straight damage. I will plug. So I got to make a list of all the things I plug. So I plug Chang'e. So that's actually coming out from GMT Games. It's on their GMT P500 program. So that's if they get 500 pre-orders, then they publish the game. So if you're interested in checking that out, you can go to gmtgames.com. I did design also a completely freely available program called McDie, MCDIE, which is available over on itch.io. And it's a node-based editor that basically lets you simulate different types of die roll situations. So if you're developing a game or you want to mess around with probabilities, you can basically just like graphically draw on the screen what you're trying to do, what the dice are on the sides, and whether they explode or they don't explode, or you just take the top highest or whatever. You can make these complicated networks of configurations, and then it'll run through and calculate the probabilities for you about exactly what the distributions are going to be and how you see it. And so I use that. I use that a lot in my.
Well, wait a minute. I'm glad I'm listening to this again. I'm gonna have to check out what that. I don't think I completely picked up on that when I was actually conducting this interview. So I use any dice a lot. So, going to anydice.com and trying to, type in what are the different rolls, then it gives you the probability distribution. Was he just saying that you could like graphically represent your probability distribution and then it would go backwards and give you your dice? That's what it sounded like. I'm gonna have to make note to go and investigate what exactly it is that he created there, because that sounds really interesting. Hay says the Genesis system also uses dice to modify the roll instead of a static number. This is to add drama and tension mechanically instead of it being all on the DM. I haven't looked at the Genesis system. That's another one we need to look at. Dice to modify the roll instead of a static number. The Dragon Ball Z RPG used a ridiculous amount of D6s. My friend and I ended up making a program on our TI calculators to roll all of them. It was pretty common to roll 400 to 500 D6s for an attack. Wow. Yeah. So yeah, that's I was wondering, I was going to put out something, but like exactly how many dice in a dice pool is too many? And I think that does depend on whether or not you have to add them all up, or did my camera just freeze? There we go. Whether you have to add them all up, or if you just have to add some of them up, like in Cortex, or if you're just looking for successes or failures. But I was thinking of, are we talking about 5? Are we talking about 10? Are we talking about 12? 400 to 500 is insane. Yes, please do hit the like button. Thank you for reminding me, Stray. I'm supposed to remind people to hit the like button and then also subscribe if you have not subscribed already, because according to my statistics, only 9.5% or 9.4% now, 9.4. So we've crept up from 9.3. 9.4% of the people who are watching the videos are subscribed. So that's very low for a YouTube channel. So if you are watching and you're enjoying it and you're not subscribed, please do subscribe. Wolverine says, and for combat, it basically, so talking about Wolverine. Oh yeah, we're going back to the RPG here. And for combat, you basically roll for attack, and the defender rolls if you roll higher than the D6. Pan says, cool, thanks. My problem with most systems, the DC number is squishy, pulled out of a general chart or negotiated. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. So I suppose if you're rolling for the DC each time, I don't know how, I'm sure it works. We're talking about rolling a 1d10, but something like Cortex, they're still rolling a pool of dice. The GM is rolling a pool of dice, but then is pulling out any 2 dice they want in order to assign a difficulty. Now, that's actually interesting because you're talking about it being squishy. So the game master could, ordinarily you'd think assign like a lesser difficulty or a greater difficulty depending on what the task is and things like that. But maybe, this is a hard task, this is a medium task, this is a very hard task. But in Cortex, you gather up all of the dice that could possibly hurt the opponent or hurt the player or make it more difficult for them to accomplish the action, roll all of them. But it's not the case that the game master is required to use any particular combination of dice. They're not required to have the highest dice or the lowest dice or anything like that. It's still squishy, like you're talking about, because the game master gets to choose which of those dice, those 2 dice, will be added together to become the target number. So if the game master really wants it to be easier, the dice may not allow it to be easier because they all may be high rolls. But if there's a spread in the roll of the dice pool, the game master can decide, I want this to be an easier task, so pick the 2 lowest. The game master can do that. Or if the game master wants it to be hard, to intentionally pick the highest. Wolverine says, my system makes everyone who isn't wearing armor have the same AC. You know, I also want the ability to hit people to be dependent on whether or not they themselves are armed. It's going to be very easy. It can be very easy to hit somebody with a sword when they are standing there completely unarmed. But as soon as they also have something to block with, they become much more difficult to hit. Now, some people may want to add that in through a parry mechanic or a dodge mechanic or something like that. But my point is that somebody who is just standing there completely unarmed is pretty easy to hit with a sword. Thank you, not all who won or lost. Thank you very much.
Game designs, just quick and dirty to kind of get a feel for getting the distribution to what I want to see. So that's, yeah, if you just do a search on McDie, MCDIE, it should come up.
Well, I have a lot of other questions I could ask. We got about 20 minutes left.
Sure.
But let me, that may mean you have to come back. I'm not even close to being done here, but this has been great. So, okay, let me just go back to the pink noise for a second there and the distribution and stuff like that. Because we talked about with the correlation that people like pink noise, but we also talked about that, okay, in the probability distribution. And this doesn't, basically an argument that I've been putting forward here in different videos is that I was preferring a probabilistic kind of random number generation rather than a flat generation like a D20. And I was looking at different methods to do that.
Mm-hmm.
If we're looking at pink noise from the correlation perspective, does that also mean that people tend to like pink noise from in the probabilistic kind of way? Do you recommend that then for game design?
Well, I mean, again, it's going to depend on what you want to do, and I think that, yeah, I mean, I would say in general, I think people like things that are more predictable. I mean, the person that just put up that question, right, about that throws off their weapon balance or whatever it was, I mean, I think the underlying thing was that, you're going to get more, maybe you'll get more results that don't kind of match your intuitive reality of what you think should happen. And, this kind of goes to people are bad at randomness, right? So people are bad at generating random numbers. People are bad at recognizing randomness. People are bad at understanding randomness. And a lot of games, it's harder to do in a board game, but in the video game world, computers will fudge the random numbers. The software will fudge the random numbers behind the scenes all the time to make it fit better with what people think is supposed to happen, right? If I'm playing XCOM and I have a 90% chance, 90% chance or a 95% chance to hit, if I miss, or I miss, God forbid, I miss twice in a row, I'm going to be like, this thing's broken. There's people equate like a 90% chance with certainty. And so actually most of those video games, many of them, to avoid these sorts of concerns, is they will fudge it. So it'll tell you 90%, but behind the scenes, it's really 95% or 96%. It tells you 80%, but it's really 90%. People tend to, kind of inflate their chances or put it into a bucket of, yeah, this is definitely going to happen. And that gets into the loss aversion book that I talked about also, in terms of how people psychologically treat random numbers. People will look at random sequences and say, oh, this isn't truly random, even though it's just as random as anything else. So I think that when you have the bell curves, the kind of the bell curve distributions and stuff like that, I think that it tends to fit more in line with, people's expectations sometimes of what probability distribution should look like. So yeah, I think that you're onto something there, that it gives people more of a sense of control and gives people more of a predictable feel. But it depends on the nature of the game. I mean, some games are more freewheeling and you want crazy stuff to happen. And some games, are more planning, and you want the things a little bit more constrained.
Yeah, that's it seems like I didn't mean to accidentally, through the videos I put out, end up being somebody who was anti-randomness, because I'm not. But while I was trying to say was that my general game design philosophy that I'm trending toward now for what I want is to give players a greater sense of control, that greater control that you're talking about over there.
It's a tool. All these things are tools, and they can all be used, in many different ways, and sometimes they're appropriate, sometimes they're not appropriate. So, but nothing is that no game is going to be for everybody, and no tool is always going to be good or always going to be bad. I mean, like loss aversion, just getting into that, is the idea is that losing something feels way worse than gaining that thing feels good. If I give you $20, you feel good. If I take $20 away from you, you feel bad, but you feel worse if you lose the $20 than if you gain the $20. And you can use that in a lot of different ways, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. I mean, like in Risk, or in Monopoly, everybody gains stuff. You gain stuff, gain stuff, gain stuff, gain stuff, but then you lose everything. Everybody loses everything in Monopoly except for one person. And that's like the worst feeling, is getting something and then having it taken away. So that's why Monopoly engenders bad feelings. Now, does that mean that you should never use that you should never give your players something and then take it away? It doesn't mean that, but it means that if you know that you're going to elicit a strong reaction to somebody. If you're playing D&D and you give somebody a pet phoenix, if you later kill their pet phoenix,
oh, you're in trouble.
That's going to be a problem. And, same thing with these randomness tools. It's, and it's interesting because psychologically they all have their different flavors. I mean, one example, like if you're coming down to a big final battle, right? Let's say we talked about that big dramatic battle. You're rolling your 1d20. This is it. This is for all the marbles. I mean, would you rather roll a die for that? Or would you rather flip a card? Would you rather shuffle up a deck of cards numbered from 1 to 20 and flip over the top card? Which one do you think is more interesting? Which one do you think is dramatic? And do those two situations make you feel different, of flipping the top card of a shuffled deck versus rolling a die? Mm-hmm. And why do they make you feel different if they make you feel different?
Yeah,
most people makes them feel different.
I would say that, that the feeling would be different, and why. And that psychology is an important part of the game design.
Yeah.
What you're trying to engender.
Right. And with most people, it's the difference is that the deck of cards it's a fact in the world, right? That card on top of the deck is the card on top of the deck. No matter what happens, it's there, right? Your fate has been determined. It's already known. You just don't know it yet. So, whereas if you roll a die, there is no fate yet. So, people approach that differently, even though mathematically it's exactly the same. So these are kind of the subtle game design things that as a designer, you can take into consideration and you can use to the best effect of what you're trying to accomplish for the goal that you've got. But there's no right or wrong whether a deck of cards is better or worse than a die.
I think what you said about adjusting, and I didn't know this because I don't play that many video games, but adjusting the probability behind the scenes based on what they display to the player versus what's actually happening, is that's probably based on a whole bunch of stuff, if not research and academia. You can do that academically as well, that like you're telling a person you got a 70% chance of that, all this stuff happens, and then you ask them, do you feel like you had a 70% chance?
Right.
And then you could match up what is somebody's feeling versus what the reality is, and then, like you're saying, behind the scenes, adjust the reality to make sure that people feel the way that you want them to feel. That's really interesting.
Yeah, Blizzard also famously, I think they still do it with in Hearthstone, when you open packs of cards, there's a certain chance you get a legendary, but for each pack that you don't get a legendary, it actually increases your chance behind the scenes of getting a legendary. And then when you get it, then it resets that counter for you back down to 0. So, because people were getting really annoyed that they weren't getting legendary cards, after opening pack after pack after pack after pack. So they kept changing the distribution. So to make it a near certainty that after X number, you'll get it at least once.
That's fascinating, because that's entirely digital.
Yeah, right.
So they can do that kind of thing.
Right.
Because
Whereas
yeah,
Magic the Gathering, they can't do that.
They can't, and you'll get yeah. And I remember I play Magic extremely casually, but I remember my friends talking about that, like some region or something would not get a certain kind of card, and that and then it's like, oh, there must be some kind of great conspiracy here, or is it that, well, if you just randomly distribute all these cards around the world, some of them might not end up in a place that's not a great conspiracy, but it feels like a great conspiracy against the place.
Yep.
If you're there in that region. Okay. Well, like I said, there's a lot of things that. Well, let me ask you one. Let me ask you another game design, and then I want to go to a business question. Then you situated randomness in the context, the greater context of uncertainty, which I think is a fantastic thing to do. Are there any innovations in the broader or game mechanics in the broader aspect of uncertainty, broader category of uncertainty, that you think are underutilized, or things that are really coming out that we should use more than we do, rather than say just the roll of the die?
Not.
Let me check out the comments before he answers that. Pan asks, is it possible to submit a dice mechanic to Jeff for critique? Well, maybe. I just reached out to him. I didn't know him personally before this. I just reached out to him, and he agreed to come on this. So maybe. Got rid of Cleric, Rogue, and Bard, but thinking about bringing back Bard, though. Yeah, I think what he was talking about with, is it cards, or is it, that brings up Gloomhaven, like you're about to talk about here. I pivoted it more towards a board game with cards and minis. Pan says, the hardest card mechanic I've encountered is Gloomhaven. Brutal. Kind of based mine off Gloomhaven. Yeah, so Gloomhaven is all card-based, which doesn't mean there isn't randomness. It's just all card-based. I really like that. Cal says, I'm priming more terrain. Got to keep up with Heath. Well, I am way behind over here on all of this deal. I got stacks of these guys to paint through, so you're probably ahead of me. Hay says, looking at it and playing different games over the years, the major takeaway I have learned is that the dice mechanic needs to serve the game narrative, or the game feels wonky. I agree with that. I'm always talking about invoking the feel. I love that the feel of the game is so important to me. And so that's why sometimes you do need a specific game mechanic designed to invoke the feel of the world, or feel of what you're trying to do. I agree.
Sure, I don't think so. I mean, I think that I've seen more and more kind of creative uses of dexterity style elements in games to kind of resolve things. Making stacks of blocks or things like that, where it's not the key part of the game, but it's enough of, it's sort of an element of the game, of the way to do randomness. I've seen a game where it's like, you've seen the carnival game where it's got like all the pennies on, or tokens on the thing, and it's got something that's pushing them, and then you drop a token and it's pushing them off. I've seen games that have that kind of a mechanism in there, where you drop objects in there and then you push it and you get what falls off the edge, as a way of kind of randomizing. And that can be, again, that's one thing, gives you more a little illusion of control that you don't really have. But I haven't seen anything too big. I'm waiting. The one thing I want to see is, I want to see a renaissance of the spinner. I think spinners have been maligned, and it's time for spinner technology to advance and come on. And that's what I'm waiting for. I got all my money invested in high tech spinners.
I haven't played a spinner game in a long time. You're
See,
right.
That's
but
why
I remember them from childhood.
Yes, and they never ever worked. Well, they were in tons of games. They all had spinners. They were cheap to make, but they never really worked that well. So that was the problem.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question on the business side of things, because you've designed and published a bunch of board games, and then also books, but you have always gone a traditional route. We call this the traditional route of publishing, which is to find some other company to publish them, rather than trying to set up your own publication company. Why did you make those choices? And well, first let's start with, why did you make those choices?
I mean, for me, it was a pretty simple choice. I mean, I've got, the game stuff, in spite of, the long list, it's spread out over a long period of time. I mean, the game stuff that I do is not a full-time job for me. I do have a job, working at engineering product development. And so, I enjoy doing that. And I knew I didn't want to, quit my job to go into game stuff full time. And there's plenty of people that do it part time, and then if it becomes successful, they can transition into it. But I just everything that goes into it, I just didn't want to have to deal with. I didn't want to have to deal with getting the artwork and dealing with the printers and being at the show and having to sit in the booth all day. I want to go to a show. I want to try different games and meet my friends and stuff. I don't want to have to sit behind a card table and hawk my games. So, for me, it was natural to go the publication route. And, it's not as potentially financially lucrative unless it hits super big. But, for me, it's about the creativity of making a game. And it was never as much about, trying to have a huge financial success.
So what recommendation would you have to somebody who is in a similar position like that? Like, I want to do game design, but I don't want to go through everything that there is to set up my own publication company, because that's just a massive undertaking. And by the way, I should say that I'll clip some of this. I always point this out to people that right here, I will clip this. Yep, right here. So this is the secondary channel right here. This is Heath's Business for Creatives. Just FYI, I'm also in the process of taking down that channel, and I'm moving over some of the stuff that I had put over there that was specifically had to do with raising money, starting a company in a Geekverse related topic, raising money for films, raising money for board games, publishing games, distribution, getting them shipped, and things like that. And I'm going to start putting those again over here on this channel. So if you're subscribed to this channel, that there's things are leaving the Business for Creatives channel and are coming back over here. So just so you know. Trick says part of the reason for randomizing target number in Ironsworn is designed to be played with a GM co-op or solo, loosely based on Powered by the Apocalypse, considering ways of modifying. Interesting. I'm very interested in the co-op or solo mode that is very well, the tabletop RPG interface, the games, the board game, and then that interface between them, but then also sliding to the GM-less play or even the solo play. I'm interested in that slide and trying to make that slide really easy. They were talking about spinners. Yeah, he was big on spinners. It might have been tongue-in-cheek. Wolverine says, I got rid of some classes because I really want to make every role feel impactful. I don't know the Joe Katz video. And there's a couple hundred videos, or actually, think about 120 videos, excuse me, nice, on being a successful creative if you are trying to do it all yourself. So if you are trying to open your own company and do your own publication company and crowdfund and all of that, I have been collecting all of the videos on this subject over here. So on the business side of things, I'll probably click that, put that over here. So if you're interested in that, that may be a resource to you. But if you look at all of that and then you legitimately go, wow, I do not want to do that. How do you go about finding publishers for board games or books? What do you recommend your strategy then be?
I can speak more to on the board game side. So, it's first off, you want to find a company that is perhaps doing games similar to what you are looking to do. And most of them will actually have submission pages or links or something on their websites, or I think is better if they say that they're going to a convention, is to set up an appointment to meet with them. Typically, you're going to have what's called a sell sheet, just a single sheet, can be double-sided, that explains your game and what it gives the elevator pitch on your game. And the thing that I would emphasize with that is, the publisher needs to sell your game. So there are, last I checked, like 4,000 to 5,000 new board games published every year. So the thing that the publisher is going to want to look at is, how is this game going to sell? How is this game going to stand out in a market that's 4,000 or 5,000 games strong? Is it different thematically? Is it got some new mechanism? Is it, what is it that's going to make it stand out above the crowd that they can kind of hook people into? That's the focus that you want to have to a big extent. and then then when if they're interested in your sell sheet, then they'll set up a pitch, and and then from there if they're interested, they'll take the game back and try it. But you want to be networking, you want to be on the websites. There's Facebook groups and things for board game designers, and publishers will post there when they're looking for stuff. And if you're really interested in getting more into this topic, my daughter is works for Indie Boards and Cards. She actually takes pitches. That's a part of her job. She's a developer, but she also takes the pitches at shows. So she was just at Geekway to the West, and she said it was actually one of her most successful pitches. She took like 6 pitches and ended up taking like 4 of the games back with her to evaluate further. Usually it's like 1 out of 6. So she's been impressed with the quality that's out there. So you could have her on, and she could give you the whole song and dance about exactly what she's looking for and how to pitch and how to work with a publisher on that.
Absolutely. One of my recommendations, and I did a video on this, but in general about how to publish was that, and this is backwards from how everybody wants to do it, but rather than design a game or design a book or write a book or a research article in academia or whatever, and then go find out who might want to publish it, is really to identify a publisher and find out what their needs are, and then design something to that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was in essence when I did my my loss aversion book, which I did with MIT Press. I just reached out to them. They have a book series called I forget what it's called, game thinking or something like that. I should probably know, but I saw the series and I was like, oh, I had this idea. I think it would fit nice in that series. And, I found the information about the series editors on their website, and I emailed them a pitch. And so I hadn't written anything. I said, here's the idea. I gave them like 2 paragraphs. This is what I'd like to write about. And they were like, okay, can you send us a chapter or 2 or whatever? And then I went back and wrote it at that point. So yeah, so in that case, I did that. I don't think you could do that. You can't do that with a game. You can't just like go to a publisher with an idea and say, and they'll come back and say, yeah, do that. And we'll, and then we'll publish it. For a game, you need to go in with a finished product. But for, a lot of these types of books and book series, if you're, particularly if it's a nonfiction thing, you can go with ideas to some of these textbook publishers or academic publishers and put an idea forward, and they'll go from there.
But even with board game publishers, if they have information up on their website about these are the kinds of games that I publish.
Yeah.
And some of them will even have things that's like, this is what we do not publish these things.
Right. So yeah. And I know that like Pandasaurus will post and say, right now we're looking for, social deduction games. We're looking for this or looking for that. Or like Indie Boards and Cards, or my daughter is, they specifically are looking for like small box games. They wanted to be social, hour tops, something like that is what they're looking for in outside submissions. So usually they're clear about that, and you want to do your homework and make sure you're going in with something that's appropriate.
All right. Well, let me see here. There's other things to hit on that. I don't want to. We're right here at the end, so I don't want to die. Well, actually, here's a question. This
sure.
It's a terrible one for right here at the end. What is a game?
Okay, well, just I don't but on Ludology I've done 3, because every time I had to bring in a new co-host, we had an episode on what is a game, and so I've spent about 3 hours talking about this topic endlessly, and actually my thinking has evolved on it somewhat. But I will give you first I will give you my definition of a game, but I will also say that game is one of those things where it's I think it's useful to think about it, because I think it helps define in your mind what what the elements of a game are, and maybe different ways you can tweak that and do it. But it's a fuzzy definition, right? It's like saying, what is red? Define the color red. You can't. There's no firm cutoff where one person's going to say, okay, this is red, this is definitely red, and this is definitely orange. It's always fuzzy around the edges. A game is the same thing. But basically a game for me is when you've got you're doing an activity, but you have to do it in a way that there's rules constraining how you're allowed to achieve the goal. And I say that knowing that it doesn't necessarily always need to be a goal. So even that definition can get a little bit fuzzy. But the key thing from my standpoint is that there's rules. There's rules that govern the player behavior, rules of what you are allowed to do and aren't allowed to do, and the players agree to abide by those rules. The classic example is like golf. Golf, the objective is to get the ball in the hole. The easiest way to get the ball in the hole is to just pick up the ball and walk over to the hole and put it in the hole. But then that's no fun. So there's a whole bunch of rules that are getting in the way of you doing that. So for me, the game, the rules are the essence. And then you can argue about, does there need to be a goal or not be a goal? Does there need to be a winner or not be a winner? I'm pretty lukewarm on a lot of that stuff. For me, puzzles, activities, games, they all blur into each other in different ways. But that also means, and this is a whole other conversation, is that there's a whole other realm of human activities that fall into that rules-based structure.
Right. Yeah, that doesn't mean, just because you
Right.
have rules does not mean that you are in the context of games. Yeah.
Right. You've got religion, for example, has certain rituals or, things people are and aren't allowed to eat, or, and you can say that that's a rule that as a community you've decided to adopt. And so it falls into sort of that same area. But, I will never, somebody thinks something's a game, that's fine. I'm never going to draw a very bright line in the sand and say this is a game and this is not a game, because I think I don't think it's possible. I think it's, like I said, like the color red. There's things that are definitely red and it's a useful concept to talk about. And there's things that are definitely games and there's a useful concept to talk about, but I'm not going to try to come up with an absolutely rigid definition that I'm going to, go to the mat on that says this is the defining feature. And so this is a game and this is not a game.
I think that's an interesting question, but also because, when I was studying in graduate school, I studied ontology and a lot of philosophy.
Sure.
And I dealt with definitions quite a bit. And everybody talks about, how do you define X or Y or something like that. And for a long, long time, game was actually an example that was used in the philosophical literature.
Oh, really?
As a word that you cannot define. And yet everybody knows what it is, and yet it's still in use. Like that was it. Because, do you need to be able to define words in order to be able to use them? There's a lot of examples in the philosophical literature that game is the example of a word that people cannot define. But one of my favorite philosophers, John Searle, and in one of his books, and I'm forgetting which book, because I was like, I got to look that up. In an asterisk, a footnote in one of John Searle's books, he said he was talking about definitions and things like that, and the game came up, and then he's got an asterisk, and you go down to the footnote, and he says, for a long time, philosophers have thought the game was unable to be defined. But as came up in one of my students, something, the definition of a game is, and then John Searle just wrote it.
Yeah, well, John Searle was wrong. I'm sorry.
I actually do like the Searlean definition, but I want to get into that in
that's
my own video. Maybe I'll have you come in for.
But I've changed on that. I have loosened on that. I mean, the very first time Ludology.
So, by the way, it's Wittgenstein. I was looking to see if I had the book over here on my shelf, and I don't. And I still want to do a specific video on this and talk more about this, the philosophical definition of a game. But that was the philosopher Wittgenstein who proposed that the word game was our quintessential example of a word that we cannot define, and yet we are all capable of using in everyday speech and understanding each other when they say the word. So that was Wittgenstein. John Searle's book, where John Searle, because I disagree with that particular philosophy, that philosophical approach to definitions. But that Wittgenstein's proposal of the word game was in the philosophical literature for a while about that. But the book in which John Searle defines it in a footnote is called The Construction of Social Reality, which is a book that I've got someplace, but I've got all of my board gaming stuff around, so I'm going to have to find my academic philosophy section of books wherever they are. But I'm going to get that and find that and go over that, because it's in the book The Construction of Social Reality. And basically what John Searle said was that you are in a game if the obstacles that you are trying to overcome, if you're trying to overcome them simply to understand whether or not, or determine whether or not you can overcome them. That's not an exact quote, but basically, if you are setting up a set of obstacles and now you're overcoming them, and why do you want to know if you can overcome them? just so you know whether or not you can overcome them, you are in a game environment. All right? Because think about, we've got a whole bunch of military discussion going on here, but I think about that in terms of war games. Is what type of, a very important type of game is a war game, right? So if there is a war game going on next door, how concerned should I be? Well, I mean, there could be some kind of accident or something like that. But okay, there's a war game going on next door. Probably not all that concerned. But if there's an actual war going on next door, then I need to be concerned. Because if we were seeing, like, the Marines try to storm a beach here, are they doing such in the context of a war game? If they are, they're trying to storm the beach just to figure out whether or not they can storm the beach, trying to overcome that obstacle. But if they are actually in a war, they're not storming the beach just to figure out whether or not they can storm the beach. They're trying to overcome objectives for other reasons, right? So that's how you'd be able to determine whether or not, I'm looking at some Marines here storming a beach. Are they doing this in the context of a war game, or are they doing this in the context of actual war? So I like the definition. I think Searle is right. Searle's one of my favorite philosophers anyway. So I just loved the fact that John Searle, in a footnote, defined game for us. And I'll find the exact quote. Defined game for us and put an end to the Wittgensteinian argument that game was the quintessential example of a word that we use but cannot define, and therefore the definitions of words are not important. That we can use words without their definition. Joe Crapp's guide to D&D series is hilarious. Oh yeah, I know. So yeah, 4,000 to 5,000 competitors a year to get the game published. It's insane, isn't it? It's insane. So but everything is this way. I mean, everything is saturated. I mean, if you like something, eventually you just have to decide, I'm going to try to make my way in it, because the way technology is, everything that we're able to do, I mean, everything, unless you're on the very cutting edge of some kind of field, I mean, everything is just saturated. Pan says, I've been using Flex AI from Infinium Game Studios. Oh, and I posted about AI today on YouTube. I did a video on AI AI DMs. And the Solo Adventures Toolbox to run solo games. The crunchier a system, the better it works. I'd be interested in checking that out. Flex AI. Okay, I'll try to remember that. So Joe needs to get work doing a crap guide to Pathfinder. Running them with Hackmaster. Oh, Hackmaster, yep. Love Hackmaster. Hey, Judy, good to see you. Yep, you're here. We're live. Hey, Seeker and Roses, good to see you. Oh, Ironsworn is free? Oh, that makes it also something we should especially look at. Another reason to look at in the morning grind. Hayes McGee says, as much as I want to encourage people to put out their own stuff and stand behind it, not enough people understand there are over 1,600 tabletop RPGs in the fantasy genre alone. I was wondering how many are published. I mean, or if you're talking about tabletop systems, but even if you're talking about tabletop RPG accessories, supplements, books, I mean, I wonder how many are published to Drive-Thru RPG every year. It's got to be an insane number. I mean, because we're just swimming in it. It's a golden age of stuff, but that means we're just swimming in stuff. Judy says, I had my first attempt at a tabletop RPG published, and it was so much fun. The GM was amazing. Cool. Hayes McGee says, look around first and be sure you're doing something different or wanted. Pan says, Hayes, I agree. It needs to be a new idea. I'm doing one with cats that need to break out of prison. Have you thought about making them explode? Exploding kittens. That was really popular. I wish I'd thought of making cats explode first. I think we're getting close to the end of this. Oh yeah, we are.
Episode 1 was what is a game. That was the entire episode.
Well,
and I was very rigid. I was like, a game has to have a goal. Games have to end. If it doesn't end, it's not a game. If it doesn't have a goal, then it's an activity and it's not a game, right? And so I was like, Dungeons and Dragons is not a game. I didn't define it as a game because you can have just an open-ended campaign and it just keeps going and whatever, right?
I would disagree with all that. The goal, to me, it's not about the goal. You don't have to have a goal, but you have to have obstacles, right? They're obstacles that you're trying to overcome, which is what we're looking at when the Marines are conducting a war game. But I would definitely have said, now I know that he's changed his opinion on this subject, but Dungeons and Dragons is definitely a game. Why are we all sitting here seeing if we can kill the orcs? Are we trying to kill the orcs because that's actually solving a geopolitical crisis in the world? No, it's not. Why are we trying to figure out whether or not we can kill these orcs? Just to know whether or not we can kill these orcs, right? And that, to me, is the critical component of a game. You're sitting here playing this game. You've set up objectives for yourself, and seeing whether or not you can overcome the objectives is its own purpose.
But then I realized that that was just silly. And I was just, and you can have intermediate goals, or you can, and you don't even necessarily need a goal, that there's other elements, or people can set their own goals that are maybe just for them in the context of it. Or, there's just so many different fuzzy little areas that.
Well, that's fine. Fascinating. I'm gonna have to go through all of that because I do want to do a video on John Searle's definition of game and that. But all right, will you let everybody know where they can find you, what you would like to point them to right here at the end?
Sure. Best place to follow me is on Twitter. I'm at G Engelstein. That's at GENGELSTEIN. So I post links to all the stuff I'm doing there. There's also a link in my bio to my Game Tech newsletter, where I talk about a lot of these topics in depth, which is just a free newsletter that comes out about every 2 weeks, theoretically, and about every 4 weeks in actuality. So yeah, come and check it out. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on and chat about this stuff. I don't know if I left people more confused or less confused, but I cop to, going a little fast and loose with some of those definitions, but like the definition of game, it may not be totally clear cut around the edges, but I think it's still a useful concept.
Well, thank you very much for coming on, especially on relatively short notice and talking. I've loved this conversation. I thought it was great. We'll have to do it again because I've got other questions to talk about. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that wraps up that episode. So let's see here. Yeah, 1,600 based on the number of core books. That's crazy. That's crazy too. So I guess that does mean we've got plenty of Morning Grind episodes. I do want to talk about other things other than tabletop RPGs on the Morning Grind, but we're focused on the tabletop RPGs right now. But at least that means if we want to stick with it, I got plenty of days worth of Morning Grinds that can be done, 1,600 episodes by looking at a different tabletop RPG. So Judy says, nice dry brushing, by the way. Well, you are, thank you very much. So I was going to say something that I've noticed about these because I was wrapping up here. But so I was trying to dry brush using a very heavy, sloppy, like I said, I'm trying to go to tabletop standard here. I want to get them done. So I haven't been especially careful. I was using this old sort of ratty makeup brush to do it. But I think that I'm going to have to do something else and come back in with a smaller brush because some of these, this is the elf, especially with the elf furniture. These are the things from the HeroQuest pack. And some of them have really deep details that I would want to be the color. Deep details aren't bad if I want them just to be black, because that's the whole purpose of this thing. But like back here inside the fireplace, I want that to be bright. That needs to be bright because the fire's in there. So that needs to be red. But this brush couldn't get down inside there, so it stayed black. So same kind of thing with these elven grates. And then also here with, for instance, this is like the alchemist's desk or something like that, alchemist workbench. There's a lot of detail or a lot of area of the table that I would want to be brown that is not going to get brown. It would stay black if I don't go and get a smaller brush. So I basically got the entire, this is another great example, like the doors here. Like this door needs to have actually color and not to be black, but it just hit, this brush just hit the very center of that. And that's not good enough. So I think that has to do with how deeply cut some of these are. I didn't have that problem so much with the miniatures. They were fine. But some of these furniture pieces have. So I basically got the medium gray dry brush 90% done or 85% done on all of the HeroQuest miniatures. But I am going to come in with another brush that's smaller and try to put on a gray base coat on some areas that are deeper cut, but I know that need to be the color. Hopefully that won't take me too long. I'm supposed to watch a movie tomorrow I'm gonna be watching a movie tomorrow with Brianna, because Brianna, I need to get my table talk intro done, because on Tuesday Brianna is going to be on the show. People have asked for her, requested her, and she and I are going to be talking about the hero's journey and story structure Tuesday night. So she and I are going to watch a movie tomorrow and then analyze it, make that part of the analysis for Tuesday night. So maybe while we're watching the movie tomorrow, I can do a little bit more painting and try to get these ready, and maybe get some white dry brush. The next step on these will be the white dry brushing on just the edges, and then they will be ready to have the contrast paints or the speed paints applied. So that's what's going on there. Oh, Hay says, thank you once again for the great week of content. Well, you're very welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Pan Smith says, how come there are no good Christian RPGs? The few I've reviewed are terrible. Is there not a market for them? That is a good question. Did I for some reason, I think I saw something just pass me by that was something like Adventures in the Bible. Was that an RPG or biblical adventures? Where did that come up? I thought maybe it was a comment or something like that, but that could be one of the ones you've reviewed. I don't know. Now, of course, I want to work on one that tells the story of the fall of Lucifer, and be working on that very soon. But it's deliberately not a Christian thing. It just draws upon that mythology. So it's a fantasy thing. Yeah, the elves can be. Yeah, I mean, this is really cool furniture, because it's the elf version of a bunch of the HeroQuest furniture, and it's very ornate, and it looks like they did a pretty good job carving them or sculpting them for the elf look, but that means that they're a little bit more resistant to this technique than other things. I mean, tabletop standard is 3 colors, black, gray, and white are colors, so, well, yeah. Back from the Lego store? Yeah, you may want an eyeshadow brush instead of a blush brush. Yeah, I need to go, like I said, this one's torn up anyway, so I need to actually go to the dollar store or whatever and pick up some more brushes. I do need some smaller brushes to use for dry brushing. The Batwing? Hay says, Pan, I still have a strong memory of being called a devil worshiper and getting beaten up for carrying my D&D books. Yeah, that Dungeons & Dragons books did not go well in my immediate family either. Didn't work. Oh, Inobane. Oh, God, I have never, I remember that, but I have never really gotten into that deep. Inobane is one we should also do for the morning grind. Man, I hadn't thought about that in a while. Pan says, I trademark Epic of Enoch, and I'm writing the Christian version of D&D for the kids. Well, that's interesting, because I read about Enoch quite a bit, and am drawing upon Enoch, the book of Enoch, for the work that I'm doing. So I'm interested to know what you do. Innomine was written by a Catholic priest? I didn't know that. I can't believe I haven't thought of Innomine. I haven't thought about that in forever. Morning grind, got to do Innomine. Judy says, I would love something Christian friendly I could do with my students. So maybe there's a market for that. If it's, well, as all things, done well. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. This was wonderful. It got stuff done. Not nearly as much stuff as I would have liked the entire day. Worked all day, but not enough stuff done. But at least all these got dry brushed. Man, really need to get them painted. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this time too. I hope the conversation was great with Jeff. I thought that was a great conversation that we did. Hopefully you are productive as well. We're going to be on the morning grind tomorrow. Oh, I got to come up with our topic for the morning grind tomorrow. So we'll do that out. I will see everybody at 9:30 in the morning. See you later, everybody. Bye for now.